Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. In today's episode, the topic is the warrior spirit, and joining me in this conversation is Colonel Todd Hulsey. We're going to dig deep into this subject, so get ready for some thought-provoking ideas. Before we start, please consider supporting this show. You can subscribe to the Spirit Aikido online program, which now has almost 160 videos. You can also contribute any amount that you like through the PayPal tip jar. Even small contributions are greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoy this content. Now, on with the discussion. So I want to welcome Colonel Todd Hulsey to the podcast. He contacted me. He runs the Dirt Wasp podcast, which is on the audio platform. And he's got his own website, and he's a very interesting gentleman to talk to. We've had a really great conversation that will probably go live in about a week when this goes up. But I wanted to have him on the podcast to talk about the subject of the warrior mindset and of the part that a lot of martial artists tend to miss when we start talking about technique. We get absorbed with how to move our feet and what techniques work best, and we kind of sometimes lose sight of the forest for the trees. And so within that broad scope of the warrior mindset, I wanted to have Colonel Hulsey on to talk about his experience, because he comes not only from a background in military, but also law enforcement, and as well as been an Aikido student. So he kind of covers the three primary realms of martial arts. And I think we could have a really great conversation today. So welcome, Todd, to the show.
Tristan, thanks a lot. And thanks again for being on my podcast the other day. I really appreciate it a whole bunch.
It was a great conversation, and you got me talking a long time. So now we're going to turn things kind of around a little bit. So this is a subject that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because it's part of the reason that I got into martial arts, not to become a soldier or a fighter, but to be able to engage in physical conflict. And that's, I think, where we start this discussion is the definitions. I think every martial artist views themselves as some kind of a warrior, or has at least a portion of that within them. And of course, every actual warrior, somebody who's been in the military or been on a battlefield or been a soldier, certainly feels that same way too. And I think defining the difference or the distinction between what a warrior is, what a soldier is, and what a fighter is a good place to start to really get that understanding. And I want to approach this from the standpoint that there's nobody's right or wrong. We're not trying to find an absolute truth and say that there is one unifying truth that we must abide by, but to understand that, in my opinion, I think anybody that engages or stands ready to engage in physical conflict is a kind of a warrior. And I would put that to people who work security, people who are bouncers, even anybody who's been in a conflict, physical conflict with another human being. For that moment, they are a warrior. What would you say to that concept, or the idea that there are these distinctions?
Well, I think these definitions are going to be really dependent on who is, perceiving what those words mean. Mm-hmm. For me, a warrior is somebody who is prepared to go to war. And I exclude people who engage in combat sports, for example, from the definition of warrior. And I don't get, upset about it, but you'll often hear the people who call fights and stuff like that. And this is true of all combat sports, but they'll say he's a real warrior, or she's a real warrior. And I know what they mean, but to me, a warrior is somebody who is prepared to go to war, and certainly someone who's been to war. Now, I don't dispute your definition at all, because that certainly also applies, because in the heat of battle, even if that battle is interpersonal violence between two individuals, then to them in that confined time and space, they're in a war. So I don't think it's not applicable. It's just that how I perceive what those words mean is probably a little different than yours. But as you said, there's no right or wrong answer. It really just depends on how one approaches approaches the definition of those words. Someone who's a soldier, I would say, is also a warrior, or should be. That's separate from mindset, but that would be the ideal. If somebody's a soldier, they're a warrior. But a warrior, doesn't have to be a member of a particular, governmental organization. For example, a tribal warrior, is certainly still a warrior, but in some senses for their tribe, a soldier. And a fighter, my goodness, there's people who train to fight. Who there are people who have never trained to fight but enjoy it. I have a cousin who we were in the Marine Corps together, and he loved to fight. He would start fights out in town with people because he loved to fight, but he had never studied a combat sport or a martial art ever in his life. He just loved to fight people. So he definitely, he's in his 60s now, so I won't say he is, but he definitely was a fighter. And having been around him when he decides to start a fight, it can, it can be disconcerting sometimes, because now there's a bar fight that, you didn't plan on getting in, but he sure started, kind of thing. And so they can be separate, they can be the same thing. I think the context is extremely important also, and how those terms are defined and when they're defined. So you have each individual's perception of what those words mean based on their own background and experience. And then you have the context in which they're used. So I mean, it's a great discussion, because we're almost speaking of philosophy more than just defining terms. But I mean, it's an interesting discussion.
It is, and I think that each of the people of those different realms, and you brought up a great one, whether it's in regards to being a fighter, and I do like the distinction between a sport fighter and, for example, like a bar fighter or somebody who just goes and picks fights. They're a little different. I think they're all worthy of respect. Not to say that I respect people that go out and pick fights, but I do respect somebody who's endured actual fighting, regardless of whether they did it for a sport or whether they did it for survival or what have you. There's something they learned in going through that process. They each have their own nuances, and this is something that I like within the discussion, and a maturity that I think people need to have when they look at this subject, is to say, you're not just sorting out who do I respect and who do I not respect, or who's right and who's wrong. There's really no superior to one another. Obviously, those who've engaged in actual conflict are worthy of that respect. And I guess you could say the same of, for example, a soldier who may be a radio operator, who never got anywhere near physical conflict, even though he wears a uniform, and that's worthy of respect. Where do you put that line of, is this a warrior? This is a soldier? I think you can trying to lump these terms together can be kind of precarious. Trying to say that somebody is a soldier, but they are a warrior, or they're not a warrior, that really depends on their experience. Obviously, a combat vet, I would definitely say that's a warrior. Somebody who's in an administrative office in Oklahoma that watches a radar, or who knows what they do. Are they a warrior? I don't know. There could be an administrator. They're a soldier, definitely. And the same thing with law enforcement. There are people that have got tremendous experience in dealing with physical contact, or at least the high potential of physical conflict on a day-to-day basis. And there are others within the law enforcement field that are administrators, and they really don't ever get into that side of law enforcement, or of being really, I like the old term, the peace officer, the original term that at least here in Minnesota is still on the certificates for licensure for law enforcement personnel. It doesn't say I'm a law enforcement officer, it says I'm a peace officer.
Same thing in Texas.
And that actually holds true to those officers of the law who take that to heart and say, my job here is to maintain peace within society. And I think this brings us to the next part of what at least I view a warrior as being, whether it's whether you're a soldier, whether you're law enforcement, even a bouncer at a club or somebody like that. It's like, my job is to maintain peace and to reestablish it if violence or discord come into this realm. I'm here to protect the club. I'm here to protect the customers and the staff. And basically, it's like a protector. You are, that's your role within society. And it can take many different faces, regardless of whether you're a security guard or, police officer, or even a firefighter. Really, I mean, yes. I view that in a great amount of great respect, that when you go and fight a fire and try to save people from that massive, terrifying conflagration, that you really, they have that heart of a warrior. It's a different physical conflict, but it still is a very dangerous, lethal conflict that they're going into.
Yes. Yeah, well, the job is the job title is firefighter, and I've never been a firefighter, but having some very close association in the past with my current city's fire department, and discussing fighting a fire, many of the terms used, the terminology sounds very battlefield like, very military. And anybody who served in the military will find the terminology very familiar. And anyone who's going to run into a burning building to save somebody, or run into a burning building to apply, a fire, like say a fire hose, to apply a firefighting technique to it, certainly as a warrior, although they're not engaged in a war against another human being or set of human beings, but against a set of conditions. And that's why, talking about what these words mean can take us all sorts of different places, because, some people who, if they haven't thought about it, they're going to think that there's only one meaning assigned to these words, soldier versus a warrior versus a fighter, but there's so many different directions to go, just like our discussion last week about Aikido. Can take you in so many different directions, and so can this. I mean, I don't know if I'm getting away from what you just said or not, but I mean, for me, a sport fighter, whichever combat sport, it's irrelevant, but a sport fighter would consider a gladiator and not a warrior. That's just how I separate the two ideas. And the same thing's true of, a football player or a rugby player or a lacrosse player. Anytime you're in a collision sport, people going out there sacrificing their bodies to win the game, I would call that gladiatorial combat. It's combat, but I would call it gladiatorial combat. Do you have to have a warrior's heart to do those things and be effective? Yes. But what's a warrior's heart? Well, I guess that goes back to mindset. It's temperament, it's drive, it's determination. All the things you would want in somebody to win a gladiatorial contest, you'd also want the mindset in somebody who has to go and fight and win a war. So, there are a lot of similarities, but the fact that there's these similarities, I think the definitions of the words can go in many different directions. And again, as I said moments ago, it is contextual. It depends on what you're talking about, how you're talking about it. And again, I don't know, I can get lost in talking about why these words can be the same and different at even the same time, and I don't want to do that.
No, that's quite all right. One of the things in thinking about it, because I mean, I've heard all kinds of different people described as, well, they have the warrior spirit, and this can be people who are like chefs or business people or sport athletes, baseball players, that sort of thing. And you think, well, how could somebody who cooks food be like considered a warrior? Or and as I think about it, one of the things that comes into play is, what is the ante that's on the table? Like, what is the level of risk that is involved? So you think about a baseball player, or a football player. Okay, well, little different level of risk. Football players a little bit more risk, physical risk of playing his game. He could get injured seriously. Baseball player, not quite as much, can still get injured, not as much. You talk about like a professional chef, probably even lower than that. But as you go higher on that risk scale, to me, that you get closer to what a warrior would deal with. Now you could say, well, what about a businessman who builds his business, he invests everything in his life, and if he loses, he bankrupts himself. Okay, well, that's a level of risk. It may not be life-threatening,
Yes.
but it could get pretty close. I mean, if you go homeless because you engaged in an endeavor, in a conflict, trying to fight for your business and build this thing, there are aspects of it. It takes willpower. It takes determination, a level of grit, a level of resilience, a level of just the combination of smarts and the desire to do that. Those are all ingredients to me of a warrior. When you're fighting for your life physically, there is something that will allow you to survive that comes from deeper than your knowledge of movements or of techniques or your ability to handle a weapon. It comes from that heart of saying, I will not be dominated. I have to win this, period. Like you don't have a choice. And, you do get a bit of that. I've met business people that are driven to that same level of competition that sport athletes are, or of, veterans that talk about what it was like to be in combat, and the fact that you could, at that time when you are being tested in that physical conflict, did you seek to prevail, or did you crumble and freeze and curl up and start crying, which can happen. These are very real things that can happen. And within the self-defense realm, which is, you are dealing with physical danger, imminent physical threat, which could be lethal, might not be, might just be, you're worried about injury. Like any of those things are a risk. And, in talking with people that have had professions where they're dealing with kind of the darker side of humanity, they always have to consider, what if I'm suddenly faced with some nut job with a knife? What if or a gun? This could be my last day going to work. I might not go home tonight. To me, that gets closer to the realm of what I always envisioned as being a warrior, kind of a mindset of, I have to prevail. Like it's not a choice. It's not a luxury. It's not something that would be cool or great. It would be, this is the difference between me going home or not.
Yeah, those are good points, because sometimes people are confronted with situations in which they have two choices: is crumble or stand up and deal with whatever the challenge is. That's for sure. I mean, you were talking, the audience who doesn't know me, I'm a retired guard colonel, but I'm also a retired FBI agent. So I had two parallel careers, one in the military, which started and ended before and after I was in the FBI, but I was a federal agent for 21 years. And there have been several occasions in which I was alone with someone who was a stone cold killer. And if anyone's, I don't want to sound melodramatic because it's not, but I think any job where you deal with lots of human beings and you learn, car salesman, a news reporter, a law enforcement officer, any kind of sales, really, any school teachers who deal with lots of people learn to read people in a certain way. And, you can sometimes, if you don't know somebody's a stone cold killer, you can see it in their eyes. You can feel it. There's a vibe that's given off, and sometimes if you know they are and they're still giving that vibe off, it can be very disconcerting. And been alone in a very small interview room with someone like that who started to act a little weird, and it was really down to this guy goes sideways, and it's me and him in this little bitty interview room. And I mean, it was tiny. And I remember thinking, I hope, because there's a camera overhead, that I hope the person in the radio room looks up and looks at the monitor while we're going at it, because, this guy, frankly, I might have to kill this guy right here. It was a weird situation. It's worthy of a longer story than we'll get to here on your podcast, just the psychology of that moment. And there were many moments like that. And if one's willing to do the kind of job you deal with those kind of people, crumbling or turning around and running away is not the option. It's not the right answer. You shouldn't be doing that job. And so that kind of goes towards maybe the warrior mindset, certainly personal determination to prevail when necessary. Now, look, I study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I can go into class on the mat and somebody who's way smaller than me. I'm not physically large, but I mean, there are people who are a lot smaller than me who are simply better than I am at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and so they can get a position of advantage and then go for a submission and lay it in. But I'm there to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so it's not an all-out fight. But one has to be prepared in certain jobs and professions, and the same thing's true for somebody who's going to get in the ring or an octagon or the cage, is to be prepared to go all out within the limits of the rules of the engagement, whether that's a set of laws or if that's rules in a gladiatorial sporting contest. Certainly have to be able to stand up and handle the situation and have the determination to see the situation through to a successful conclusion. And in some walks of life, that conclusion is either you live or not. And so the successful conclusion is that you certainly want to prevail so that you preserve your life. And insofar as that goes towards mindset, well, I think that's everything. I really do. I think that's absolutely everything.
You bring up a really great scenario of, I think, what describes the crossover of the warrior mindset to that of a fighter. When you enter that room to I assume you were interrogating them or doing an interview or something with them, but you're alone. That part of your mind says, is my fighter side able to deal with this guy? Am I trained enough? Am I confident enough? Do I look at his size, my size? I know what I can do. I've got an idea maybe of what he can do. And now you're looking at it just from a pure fight perspective. Like, what are my physical advantages, disadvantages? Am I going to come out of this? And this is something that I've got a good friend of mine who's also in law enforcement. He comes from a wrestling background. And he says, I go through this all the time. You eye up somebody like, can I handle this guy or these people if there are multiple? What are my odds here? So you slip into that fighter mindset, but that's kind of a subset of the overall condition. And that might be maybe not an isolated scenario like you have, where you have this monster contained in a room and you decide to enter in by yourself with him, but that might be, in an environment where you are with somebody that you maybe don't feel confident that you could physically handle, that if you got into it with him, he would prevail, or they would if it was multiple people. And I think many martial artists, almost everybody that's got at least even an understanding of violence, realizes you can get yourself into a trouble that even having tremendous talent, you might not walk away from. Like, there's a chance that you could be overwhelmed or you could be taken out. Like any realist would say, at least it's not delusional thinking there's some kind of martial arts god, could say, I could get bested and this could be my last day. But I think this is a good separation between the strategic part of the warrior mind and the tactical side of the fighter. And that sport fight really has that aspect of, all right, what's my opponent? Can I take him out? Do I know his background? I know how he fights. I've studied him. Like, that's where that fighter really spends a lot of his focus. But it's part of that broader warrior sense. And I want to jump in with one of my favorite quotes from Heraclitus, he said, out of every 100 men, and I've got it right here, so I'll just read it. Out of every 100 men, 10 shouldn't even be there. 80 are just targets. 9 are the real fighters, and we're lucky to have them, for they make the battle. But the one is a warrior, and he will bring the others back. And that says to me that, just like what you talked about, there's a certain level of strategic sense, intelligence, problem solving. It's not just the fighter side that says, I can handle this guy and I know what techniques I'd use to do it. I know what approach I would use to do it, sort of that hard physical aspect, but the strategic aspect. And to me, that's a big part of what makes the warrior mindset. And not where I think, like a business person, they are very strategic. They have to think about every move they make and whether or not it gains their project or what have you. And not to say that business people I would classify as warriors, but there's an aspect to it that general, the general on the battlefield who's trying to win that battle and save the lives of his men. And that's where I think that quote comes in, is the strategic side of the warrior mind. And it's not a fighting mind. It's not to go cause fights or create fights when there wouldn't be one, or create conflict because you like it or enjoy it. It's you do it because you have to, because it will bring, and maybe this is where we cross over into the peacemaker side of the warrior mindset.
It could be, but Heraclitus' quote, about that one, what that says to me is somebody who is able to adapt to a rapidly changing set of circumstances. Mm-hmm. Because he talked about the 9 who they were lucky to have because they were the real fighters. Then you had the one warrior who'd make sure that they would all come home. And to me, now look, I've never been in combat. I was an intelligence officer, and I've been to the Middle East, but I was in the rear with the gear. Doing secret squirrel stuff. You'll never hear me make up anything about my military or law enforcement service. I've done nothing spectacular in either. I was the epitome of average in both careers. I have never done anything that I would call heroic. I've been in some very dangerous situations, but just as part of the job, and I didn't do anything that my cohorts wouldn't have done or were doing at the same time. But we look at, I listen to Chael Sonnen sometimes. He said, the person who wins the MMA match isn't necessarily the best fighter. It's the best fighter that night. And you can listen to others talk, doesn't matter the combat sport, boxing, wrestling, MMA, Muay Thai. An honest competitor will say, anybody can get you. Anybody can be gotten. There's it's been around for a long time. It's been attributed to Mike Tyson, but it certainly predates him, that everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face. And so in the quote from Heraclitus, that one is someone, in my view, who can rapidly adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. When chaos reigns, they can see through the chaos and see the operation or the mission through to the end. And those people, I think, are they're unique, and so that why there's this 2,000-year-old quote that or maybe it's even older than that talks about that one, and that's somebody who you could say has a strategic view, which really helps when everything around you is utter chaos, but also as the self-awareness coupled with the self-confidence to be able to deal with those circumstances. Because if we're going to talk about combat, whether it's what I have described as gladiatorial combat, or we're talking about all-out war, I'm going down a path I don't really think I want to go down right now. It would be too confusing. So,
well, I could jump in with something that occurs to me here too, and that is,
go ahead, please.
The influence that we often have with movies and TV in envisioning a warrior being this greater than life epic hero who, like Achilles, is able to face hundreds of men, or Musashi, his stories of surviving battles and prevailing in every fight that he's ever been in. And we almost get drawn into glorifying the facing of danger and being able to easily survive it because of what we see from action movies and sword and sorcery movies and things like that, which are, in terms of real violence, completely different from what real actual violence is. And I'm also brought up another quote that I really like from Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, and he said that sweat saves blood, blood saves lives, and brains save both. And to me, that says a warrior is not just about getting in the greatest battle and fighting the greatest odds. He's about fighting smart and saving his men, his own life, and prevailing in a way that uses strategy to avoid risk, not to just go into the big risk to be a big hero. And in that sense, I think that it's easy for us to take great action movies and things like that and allow those things to distort our view of what a warrior is, and to think it's just it's an epic level fighter who's able to beat everybody. Your Conan the Barbarian, or something of that nature.
I think as human beings, we tend to look at to an idyllic figure as a fighter. I don't know how many people listening to or watching this podcast have met an actual commando, but Hollywood will recruit a bodybuilder to play a commando. But if you meet an actual commando, you might be underwhelmed as to their physicality, because these are people who they don't necessarily, I'm not saying they don't, I'm saying it generally speaking, if you look at a room full of guys who are commandos, they're obviously in very good physical condition, but they are not big giant guys with muscles bulging out everywhere. They're not. They're usually long and lean. The kind of guys that can get on a pull-up bar and do 30 dead hang pull-ups and then go run 10 miles in 49 minutes. That kind of guy, not a guy who has, like I said, muscle coming out of muscle. But Hollywood is not going to cast somebody, generally speaking, that looks normal. They're going to cast a typical actor who's 20 pounds underweight, which is wrong, or they're going to cast a bodybuilder, like, who is way out of proportion to what, a real commando would look like. But people would want either the actor, because he's an actor, and we all know they're 20 pounds underweight, and then the bodybuilder, and neither's realistic, but what we tend to like, because you brought it up, is Conan the Barbarian. Mm-hmm. The same actor.
That's visually appealing on a screen. Yeah.
Is visually appealing on a screen. Also was in that movie Commando, Mr. Schwarzenegger, the former governor of California. So we have this archetype that we look up to, but it's the same thing in the realm of fantasy. And look at superheroes. There's a, and we look at the panoply of Greek and Roman gods and how they were portrayed in sculpture and statuary. So, we have a tendency to put things on a pedestal, and it's an archetype of what that thing is, when in reality, it's probably nothing like that. For example, the person who is reported to be the most highly decorated American soldier in World War II was Audiel Murphy, all 5 feet 4 inches of him. Read some Medal of Honor citations and look at some of those folks, and they all look pretty normal average, because the heroism and the ability is from the inside, not the outside, although there has to be some certain level of physicality to do those things. And I think that what we think of when we think of a warrior is, again, it's more of an archetype when we visualize it, but that doesn't go to what a human can actually do. And I might be going different places here, Tristan, so you can rein me in.
Sure.
But a buddy of mine who was a uniformed police officer for a long time. He, first of all, he said that the most successful law enforcement is when nobody goes to jail. So that goes back to the peace officer idea. And the second thing is, he tells a story about when he and another officer pulled this guy over in Houston, and this guy was 5'7", 130-pound sopping wet meth head, and the guy he was with, the police officer, is like 6'3", 260-pound bodybuilder. He called my friend called the other officer Zeus. And he said the meth head just up and drop kicked him, just like WWE drop kicked this enormous police officer that my buddy called Zeus, and put him on the ground. And then they were in for a hellacious fight. And this little guy didn't have a shirt on, and he was sweaty, and so he was slimy, and they had a real hard time, getting that guy restrained and into custody. So it doesn't go to, you may attribute that to intoxication of some level in that particular case. But my point is, you can't just look at somebody if they're the archetype and believe that they're going to prevail based on a certain physicality. And I think as martial artists, and for anyone who deals, whether they're working a door at a nightclub, or whether they're a uniformed security professional, or whether they're a law enforcement officer, we all have a tendency to start out judging a book by its cover, and we sometimes we're right. I don't want to. Sometimes we are right, but sometimes we can be wrong, and to understand that, the ability to prevail in a situation really does come from what's up here. And then it leads me back to what you said about the Rommel quote. Sun Tzu teaches that the best victory is one in which you don't actually have to fight your opponent,
right?
Which goes to strategic thinking. So this is what's interesting about human conflict, is that it is such a vast topic. And as a consumer of martial arts related podcasts, my podcast leans heavily towards military and martial arts subjects. Studying martial arts in my life, having been in the military and law enforcement for multiple decades, and I did 39 years in military uniform, from private to colonel. That we talk about human violence, and it is an encompassing subject, sir, and how we as individuals and societies deal with it. And it is one of the most talked about and celebrated subjects, as well as one of the most talked about and reviled subjects, one that we glorify in our TV shows and our movies, and which we also speak about derisively when it happens in real life. And violence can take the form of whole nation states fighting each other, down to two people fighting each other, in an alleyway, or in an agreed fight for prize money, or a belt, or a ring, or a hat, or something.
And that's
it's
the
a vast
definition of war that you've defined. And most of us, when we think of war, is two states that go to war against one another, and they have their armies and whatnot. But as you said, war can come down to two individuals or groups. I mean, gang members in a violent neighborhoods, they're certainly warriors. They're in an ongoing series of conflicts and battles all the time. And that's something that I think needs to be appreciated. Obviously, a smart person doesn't put themselves in a place where they are surrounded by violence all the time. I think a wise person figures out how to move and to put their life in such a way where they're not in the trenches, so to speak.
Yes.
I would say that a spouse living with an abusive husband or wife is a warrior. They're dealing with ongoing, constant warfare, and it's perhaps more of a spiritual nature or an emotional nature, maybe not physical, although it might be. There's certainly plenty of examples of that, but the PTSD or the emotional damage that happens from being exposed to those ongoing threats and intimidation and manipulation and violence is, the same, I would say, as any combat veteran. It's very damaging to the soul, and I think that's where we as martial artists, and I think we discussed this a little bit on the interview, the chat we had about Aikido, in that Aikido, like many martial arts, the practitioners often hyper focus on, like, what are the techniques? What are the physical motions? What are the physical movements? They think like a fighter. And the irony, especially within the Aikido community, is the range of people who think like a fighter, but yet completely reject the idea of violence or concept of violence at all. And they will often advocate, if you're ever in a place where there might be violence, you just leave. Or if you're faced with it right to your face, you just run away. And that's the biggest irony to me, is thinking like a fighter and thinking about, studying the physical aspects of physical conflict. And then when you actually get to the point where you might have to use it, then you just flee. And that's the only kind of strategic approach that you have. The only card in your deck is just run away. That seems very odd to me. But obviously, even if on the other side of that, you have the people that are very physically competent, they can't sink into just feeling like, okay, now it's time for me to unleash all this physical stuff that I've been training, and now it's time for me to turn into a fighter and just like a missile, just go. If they do, they can lose sight of that strategic view that might interrupt them and say, what you're about to do, you're about to unleash yourself, that might be the worst thing you can do right now. So don't do that. Well, if you don't listen to that side and you just off you go, now you can wind up, basically being like a kamikaze or some sort of berserk, where you can, go into a situation, probably wasn't the smart thing to do, but you did it anyway. And now you either get beat up or worse, or, something happens where you later regret it. So to me, that's how I see that fighter realm. And then obviously the peacekeeper is the dilemma. And whether it's, a father that fights for the safety of his family, or, a brother or sister or something of that nature, where you can't just run away and leave somebody innocent, or you witness an innocent person getting victimized. And you say, well, if I intervene, this could be dangerous for me, so I'm just going to leave, or something of that nature. I think this is where the subject of, I need to reestablish peace. There is discord here. There's something happening that is inhuman, or, beneath civility, and I need to intercede and put a stop to it. And, I've heard people argue against, well, that's for the law to do, that's for, police officers to do. But the reality is police officers can't cover everything. And I live in Minneapolis, and we're living through that right now, and have been for the last year, of what happens when there isn't anybody at the other end of the phone that can come and save you when you need it. And this is, I think, not unique to Minneapolis. It's not even unique to our modern world. This has been throughout history. There are times when you may need to step in right now at this moment to save yourself or an innocent person. And, there aren't any hard and fast rules about the judgment of when should you do it and when should you not. That's each person's judgment. But I think in terms of martial artists, at least most of the ones that I've talked to, one of the reasons they train is for the time when, should that happen, they will have the best chance of reestablishing peace. And they do that out of commitment for their own safety, the safety of their families, the safety of their community, and the safety of society in general. And to me, that's noble. Whether you wear a badge or not, taking on that responsibility of saying, I want to be a peacekeeper, whether it's just my neighborhood or what have you, that's a noble purpose. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with everything that you've said. And I think that's where thinking strategically really comes in, because, if we go back to what you said about somebody saying or having in their mind that, well, if I get into some conflict, I'll just run away. Well, what's the contingency plan if that's not the option? Has that been thought through? Because it's not always going to be an option. Avoiding trouble, I would obviously, and every time, encourage people to avoid trouble. I mean, there's an old saying, and at my late 50s, I believe it's true, is that nothing good happens after midnight.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good rule of thumb. If somebody frequents an area of town in which there are lots of young men consuming alcohol, probably, if you're not gone by midnight, I mean, 10 o'clock's probably a good time, but certainly midnight, because that's when the ruckus is going to start. And if
That's
you're
where the risk goes up.
That's right. It's when the risk goes up. So, I mean, I'm not trying to give people listening or watching instructions. What I'm saying is that's where thinking strategically comes in. And because that's very important. But when we talk about keeping the peace, this is something I was reading just very recently, and I can't remember where, what I was reading it in, but it was talking about, can you use force to keep the peace? And whether or not the use of force in keeping the peace it's kind of may sound circular, but is proper because it's not peaceful. And can you really keep the peace by not being peaceful? And I think that, a person could wrap their mind around an axle with that problem. So I default to actual human experience over the last 5,000 years of recorded history, is that, sometimes to keep the peace, you have to use force. And the application of that force upon an individual or individuals may indeed be a violent application, but that's what's necessary to preserve and or maintain the peace. And I think some people, they haven't thought about peacekeeping or violence in those terms, and they probably need to. And in fact, on my business email, below my signature block, it says violence is a tool of evil. Force is a tool of good. But can you apply force without violence? Not always. So even there's a philosophical disconnect in that one line. Violence is a tool of evil and force is a tool of good. Yeah, but what if the application of force is violent? Because sometimes it's necessary. How do I know that? Because there's 5,000 years of human history that's been written down that tells us so. And especially the last 2,500 years of that 2,000 years. And so, so to be peaceful and a peaceful warrior is fine if one is ready to actually be the warrior part. And we talked about Aikido in my podcast when you were on, and I know that's not what you want to talk about specifically here, but I've given a lot of thought about Aikido, because I've spoken to you and I've spoken to Christopher Hine from Aikido Discussed podcast and Aikido of Fresno, and I go back to this notion that some Aikido practitioners, and I consume a lot of Aikido material on YouTube just to watch, is that if somebody is attracted to a martial art for the purposes of being able to, quote, take care of themselves, close quote, whatever that means to them, but they want to do it in a peaceful way, simply doesn't comport with actual human behavior, especially in dealing with violence. So one can be a peaceful warrior as long as one has the ability to be the warrior when it's necessary. And being that warrior when it's necessary, it may be necessary to keep the peace. And then that person has to apply force. And the application of that force may be violent. And so we go back to the question of violence. And so in human society, as I see it, And man, I got to tell you, Tristan, I'm a big Star Trek geek going back to, I mean, I can actually have don't know why, a memory of the original series in broadcast, 1969, season 3 of the original series. That's how my geekdom goes back to being 5 years old. And Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future is great, but the idea that we will grow out of our, the base instinctive behaviors that we as the human primate have, I think is really is very hopeful, but asking too much in terms of reality. So, I think, so we're talking about the warrior mindset. If somebody believes that they have it, they have to be willing to employ it in the right circumstances when it is appropriate to do so. And when you were laying this out a few moments ago, it got me to thinking about us as martial artists. And I'm a martial arts student. I can't say I'm a martial artist. I'm a student of martial arts. I don't think I'll ever achieve martial artist level. But there's so much focus on techniques. And it gets to the point where, and there's probably somebody typing, if this goes up on YouTube, there's somebody who's typing right now about how, there's techniques that suck and their techniques are better because they study fill in the blank martial art. Well, that's really defining the conversation down to just an aspect. It's like looking through a cardboard tube when you get finished with your roll of paper towel and concentrating on technique, because technique doesn't always win the day. And I'll go back to my quote of Chael Sonnen, who said, the winner of the match may not be the best fighter, just the best fighter that night. Well, how come there might be somebody who's the best fighter that night, but between the two of them is not the best fighter? And also you can point out, this has been pointed out by other people, not original with me, how come there's a guy who goes to the pub every Friday and Saturday night, and if he gets in a fight, knocks everybody out, who's never trained not one day in any kind of combat sport or martial art, never, but he's just that bloke over there who you don't want to mess with. Why? Well, it could rest largely on physicality, but I think it rests mostly on that person's mindset. But then that takes us to again, part of the techniques win the day conversation is that a lot of martial artists don't pay any attention to, and I say a lot, I mean, I don't know how many, but I know there are martial artists who pay no attention to physical fitness, none whatsoever. And as I told you when we were talking last, is that there's a lady at my jiu-jitsu gym who is a belt higher than I am and who's better than me. And she can submit me quite often, even though if I walked up to her, I could pick her up and throw her across the gym. The size differential, she's really tiny and she's really petite. I can pick her up and throw her across the gym. How do I know this? Because I know what I can deadlift. And I know that I can pick her up and throw her across the room. Her jiu-jitsu will not save her from me picking her up and throwing her across the room if that's what I decided to do and she didn't know it. But if we're training and we know we're trying to train a certain set of techniques, she's better because that's what I'm doing, right? So somebody, a person can be physically outmatched. It doesn't matter what they train in or how much training they have. And that's what goes back to having, a strategic mindset and also being self-aware of what one is really capable of, and not tangling with somebody who just because, I've studied this fill in the blank for X number of years, and this dude has studied nothing. You can tell. Don't sell the opponent short. We should never underestimate our enemy, so to speak, or underestimate our opponent. And I think it goes back to, again, the strategic thought process, and which formulates part of the warrior mindset. Because if you don't have the strategic thought process that goes along with what other people would talk, when we say the warrior mindset, then you're not really talking about a warrior. You're talking about maybe a brawler, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you said, when we started this show, he's called him a fighter. So yeah. So there's no real strategic thought behind it. It's just,
and I think I like the point that you hit on, and I guess I would call the word sophisticated, where we are in society, human development right now. A lot of times people think themselves sophisticated enough that they can always negotiate their way out of a conflict. That they view their opponent much like they are, probably very intelligent, very articulate, and they view that if there's a conflict between two civilized people, we can discuss it out or negotiate a peace. And I think people that tend to think like that have not seen the dark side of humanity. They have not been with somebody who is thinking like a savage. They are beneath negotiation. They will not be reasoned with. They are angry, they're in a rage, they won't be cajoled, they only want submission, and to unleash their aggression. And I guess from perhaps you could call it a rules of engagement type of approach, to me, the strategic mind says, okay, let's try to avoid violence. Is there any other way to solve this problem? And you may have a few moments to think of a good plan, or maybe not, but the violence should always be, or the force, you could use that word as well, should be the last card to play from your hand. It shouldn't be, oh, I've got this fighter inside me and it's time to unleash him. And okay, well, this sounds like it, so let him go. It's try to figure out, is there a peaceful way to resolve this? If there's a way that we can avoid this being a big problem, and whatever you can think of, certainly try it, certainly do it. If you can succeed that way, Sun Tzu would give you his stamp of approval for winning the war without fighting the battle. But should the time or the opportunity, I shouldn't say opportunity, should you be forced into no other option, when you decide to unleash that fighter, he should prevail. And maybe you need to maneuver the person you're in conflict with, or the parties you're in conflict with, peacefully maneuver to a position of advantage. So if it does, that switch has to be thrown, you will have the best chance of taking control of that situation and prevailing with the use of force and not overusing it. And this, I think, is something that any good self-defense attorney will warn somebody about when they say, well, I want to start carrying a weapon or carrying a gun, or I'm going to protect myself with, whatever you know how to do. And they'll say, well, be very careful, because in a blink of an eye, you can go from justified self-defense into attempted murder. And it can be in the span of less than a second, because once somebody who attacks you submits, you no longer are justified in applying force or violence to them anymore. And this is one of the problems with what I would call the fighting mindset versus the warrior mindset or the peacekeeper mindset. Is the peacekeeper knows once peace has been restored, you stop, like that's it. But the fighter can go a little overboard, because sometimes people will actively use adrenaline, or they will get carried away by their adrenaline and go farther than because of the emotional part of dealing with violence that can come up. And to me, this is where training comes in, where when you have control, how much, and more importantly, what the limits of the force you're going to apply are or should be. And that's why we train. It's not to train to do harm or train to hurt people. You can learn to do that in a very short time. What takes a long time is learning how to control without injuring or harming somebody, or having to take it to a very high level of damage or injury. And one of the things I wanted to talk about in this with you is, and I think this is important for every martial artist to understand, is the difference between a military violence approach and a civilian violence approach. Because when it comes to fighting or self-defense or martial arts, many people think it's like, okay, now I'm defending myself, it's go time. I'm going to absolutely do everything I can to rip this person apart to get them to stop attacking me. And there are a few times when that is completely justified. But sometimes it's not. You can go overboard, and at very least, it would be a poor fit to take the military battlefield mindset complete disregard for your opponent into a civilian realm, where this could be at a restaurant, could be at a concert, or some sort of environment where you go all military on somebody. And I think that's a big differentiation to make to people, especially for martial artists, we civilians who are learning a martial art, but chances are we're going to be in a civilian environment when we have to use it, not in a military or a battlefield type environment. Maybe you could address your thoughts on that a little bit.
No, I think you're right. I think you've set the table very well, but you got me thinking about, first of all, also I'm a lawyer. So people
I didn't know that. We learn something new every day. Okay.
The lawyer jokes and
nice.
I love those. In self-defense, the use of force has to be reasonable and proportional, and that use is based solely upon the facts of that event. Everything's fact driven, and so I make that point because say somebody gets a license to carry a concealed handgun, that's great, but that doesn't mean you can use it because some guy across the parking lot yells, "Hey, you're ugly, I'm going to kick your ass." That is not the time to unsheath that firearm and point it at the person, because that is not reasonable and proportional to somebody yelling something like that. And in most states, pointing a firearm, just pointing of it, would be aggravated assault, which in my state will get you 5 years in prison. Mm-hmm. So that's where, again, the strategic thinking has to come in. One has to put thought behind the use of any kind of force. Well, you talked about, I think you used the term blatant disregard in regards to the use of military force. The last time the United States blatantly disregarded anything outside of winning in a war was World War II. Ever since then, there have been more and more rules that are placed on the use of force. When I was going through the Air Command and Staff College, which is the school that majors go through so they can make lieutenant colonel, we talked a lot about the profession of arms, and the profession of arms is in the context of one lesson, because it stuck with me, is that we as military officers are managers of violence. Managers of violence, not violators, not violent individuals, managers of violence that can only be used within the rules of warfare. And there are rules of warfare, international law, mm-hmm. that the United States follows. And then in each conflict, there are rules of engagement and how military force may be applied. But, that's analogous to the application of force in any context. A police officer can only use force that's reasonable and proportional in the performance of his or her duties in accordance with the law. And so they not only have, the U.S. Constitution that they have to follow all the time, but any applicable federal laws, even if they're a local officer, certainly state law in the state in which they operate, and then any, city ordinances that may apply. In states in which counties can make ordinances, any county ordinances which may apply, plus the policies and procedures manual of the department that they work for. So they have to operate within a very distinct rule set. And the same thing's true for civilians in terms of self-defense. So again, it goes back to facts and circumstances are important to the most important thing to the analysis, and then the use of force has to be reasonable and proportional. And you brought it up earlier about I'm just going to go unleashed on this person and just go. As soon as you've eliminated whatever the threat is in that particular situation, then if you apply more force than what is necessary, and I said reasonable and proportional, you could throw in the word necessary as well to that, then that's more force than you need. And then what may be a lawful self-defense situation can become unlawful in the eyes of the police and, most importantly, the prosecutor. who's really going to be the linchpin in any self-defense matter. And so having I think martial arts training is great, especially if the martial arts school actually talks about using the martial art on the street, and not in a boastful way. You can look up, some school someplace in which they pride themselves on teaching, as some people say, for the streets. And you guys know those who want their students to actually not only have some physical skill, but have the mindset to appropriately use that physical skill. And that's extremely, extremely important. In fact, that's the most important thing, really, is that mindset. Yeah. Not only to be able to have the warrior mindset of determination and the willingness to succeed in a very bad circumstance or situation, but to know what the limits are to whatever force or tool that one may be using to defend oneself against whatever the threat may be.
Yeah, and with the tools, I mean, I've been since I've been 6 years old, and I got a firearms instructor, advanced self-defense firearm instructor, all that stuff. But what I found is, in looking at it, this was a profound thing I came across years ago, and that said, at least here in the United States, only 5% roughly of the violent exchanges justify the use of lethal force. So if all I knew how to do was draw a pistol, what are the odds that it would be overkill if I were to actually shoot somebody with it? Well, 95%. So then the question was, what do I do in that other 95% where I am being subject to a level of force, but it's not justified for me to use lethal force. And I'd use the same criteria for me throwing somebody on their head and breaking their skull or their neck or something like that, which, Aikido, judo, any throwing art has got a capability of causing pretty severe damage just by throwing somebody on their head. And I love the way that you put it, and this is language I use myself, is that what is a proportional response? What does this circumstance call for? What's the minimum amount force you can apply to get your end, which is to reestablish that peace? And that's, boy, there's so many circumstances. We could talk for months and not cover all of them, of
right.
What's required. Who are you dealing with? What mindset are they in? And we often talk about the warrior mindset, but a big factor is, what are you facing? Are you facing a raw animal that's about ready to chew your face off? Or are you facing somebody that's a little belligerent? Maybe they're, behaving like a jackass, and you need to just get them away from you or back it down or whatever. I think a lot of people, when they talk about this subject, would just love it for the formula to be easy and simple. And unfortunately, because of the complexities of human behavior and of human conflict, there is no one simple cookie cutter answer.
No.
To me, though, you can boil them down to a few rules, a few kind of simple rules to keep in mind, because it's too elaborate. Once you're under stress, you're not going to remember, anything elaborate. But one is, don't use force if you can use your cunning. But if all of your cunning fails you and you have to, finish it quickly. Don't play around with your food. Don't have it be complicated. Just keep it simple and immobilize somebody if you can. If you can't and they keep coming at you, you might have to hurt them. And that's where your personal judgment comes in. How much do they take? And I recall reading a book. I wish I could remember the author. I think it may have been in Meditations on Violence by Rory Miller, where he talked about he had a bit of a jiu-jitsu background, or at least the author did it. If I'm mistaking it for Rory Miller, then I apologize. But he came from a jiu-jitsu background. He was pretty well trained, and he was on the job as a bouncer. And he had this drunk guy, and this guy was getting belligerent with him. And so he said, I kind of spun him and dropped him, really elegant, super soft, didn't harm this dude at all. He says, in fact, I kind of wish there was a camera there, because I did a really good job of being super smooth with him. And he said the guy just thought he fell, he got back up, and he kept right at it. And he said, the thing I learned on the job, both with that incident and a couple of others, is Sometimes people are in a state of mind where they need, he called it an AI, or an attitude interrupter. It was something to jar them out of their mental mindset of, I'm going to be belligerent, I'm going to have my way, I'm going to dominate another person or cause damage, or whatever discord they were entertaining with. There's some disharmony. And he said, as much as I love the cool and smooth, and it wasn't Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I think it was more of a traditional standing jiu-jitsu similar to Aikido, but he said, I love all that stuff, but sometimes you need to kind of get somebody in the brain to make them realize this isn't just accidental. I'm controlling you. And if you don't stop, you're going to run into a hard wall here. So let's back it off. And I thought that was a profound sentiment, because oftentimes we think about our own mindset of being smart and calm and focused, intent, but controlled. But it's easy to overlook the mindset of the person you're dealing with. And this is where I come back to Sun Tzu's, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, in 100 battles, you'll never be in peril. We often look at ourselves so diligently and we overlook what could we possibly be dealing with, or where's this other person coming from? What do they need from me to have them stop their violence? And I think those are some profound questions, and an appreciation of, don't just think about yourself, but also think about where this other person's at. What do they need to stop them? And I'm sure with your experience in law enforcement, you've probably seen or heard of some pretty crazy people that needed a lot to put a stop to their aggression. That can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand. Was that book by Angus McYoung, or was it Rory
Mark
Miller?
McYoung? It could have been. I don't think it was Mark McYoung, although he's kind of within that cadre of people that wrote about self-defense from a very practical and real-world standpoint.
Yeah, maybe I just listened to some AC/DC, and that's where that Angus comes from.
Angus,
but anyway,
I don't think they're related.
But no, you're absolutely right, and everything you said, I certainly agree with you, and I tell you, if we did an episode just talking about self-defense, we could do it for several hours and only get to really scratch the surface, because there's so many things that go into it. And then most people default to techniques. What's going to work in a fight? Well, these things, boxing, wrestling, judo, et cetera, et cetera. And these other martial arts, they never work in a fight. And few people sit and talk about the use of one's mind in any kind of human conflict. I will say that, and you see it on martial arts school and dojo doors all the time. So leave your ego outside. Mm-hmm. And that's great advice, but it's also great advice going through life in terms of interpersonal conflict. It's so easy to say, and it's so utterly hard to do, is leave one's ego outside, or leave it aside in dealing with other people, because it can certainly diffuse a lot of conflict. A person can diffuse a lot of conflict using their mind and using their words if they try. And I always commend the book Verbal Judo to everybody. I recently reread it because at a gas station, I was a jerk to a guy, and it could have become a fight. Didn't get anywhere close to that, but as soon as it was over, and my wife was driving her car, we were pulled up at a gas station. There's a dude in front of us in the car just sitting there, and it's like clock's ticking, and he's sitting there. He's not moving. So I go to the passenger side, just tap on the window and wave at him and said, hey, you going to fill up, or, what's the deal? And my wife was annoyed, so I was annoyed. What I should have asked is, hi, do you need any help? Is anything I can do to help? Because we've been waiting behind you. You hadn't moved. Just want to make sure everything's okay. That's a way different approach, and one in which you are now a friendly person approaching for a friendly reason, but the result's going to be the same. The guy was looking at his phone. He said, I'm dealing with the situation. And he probably was. Who knows what it was, but it probably was. So I came with aggressive in my voice, and and so after that, and I say nothing happened. But I got back into my wife's car as he was getting ready to pull out, and we'd pull up to the pump. And I just thought, what the hell is the matter with me? I know better than to do that. That was that, I let my wife, and she wasn't overly annoyed. She wasn't angry, but she was a little annoyed. She's an impatient person. So that, I was feeling that vibe. So I was getting annoyed, and I projected it to this guy. Well, I don't know what his situation was, but what if it was so bad he needed to take it out on me? And because of my approach, this may be a family show, I was a dick. And like I said, as soon as nothing happened, as soon as I got.
All right, we're coming back from a slight technical glitch. We want to follow up with Colonel Hulsey with his story about the interaction at a gas station. Maybe you care to carry on with that.
Yeah, sorry about that. My Wi-Fi just simply dumped. Back online now. Yeah, again, if the guy were to tell the story about what happened at the gas station, I would have been the jerk in the story. And as I mentioned, it caused me to bring out, reread the book Verbal Judo, since I have a bookshelf behind me. Here it is, Verbal Judo, and the author is George Thompson, and he's gone now. He's no longer with us, but I think the ability to use tactical communication with people is something that is, frankly, it's not taught to cops very much, if at all. And it's not taught to martial arts students very much at all. And, it really should be, because, you never know who you're dealing with on the street, what they may have on them. And it's always better to use tactical communication rather than close physical tactics if one can help it.
Sure. When you tell that story, it strikes me that a warrior tends to view things in terms of what is their level of importance, like what would require them to engage. And I've felt this too in dealing with high crisis situations. When you are in a situation of immediate peril, emergencies, you could describe them that way. You quickly sort out what needs to be dealt with right now and what is not important. And I think most of the things that we deal with in our normal lives, when we're cut off in traffic, or we deal with a mild inconvenience, it may seem to us that that's important, but when you really deal with a heavy duty crisis, you realize the grand scheme of things, no, it's not important. Somebody cuts ahead of you in line in the grocery store. Is that really important? Not really important. And this is something I think a lot of soldiers that encounter a battlefield situation, or police officers who deal with very dangerous, extremely dangerous or lethal situations, severe car accidents, that kind of level of emergency, get a dose of kind of that reality of what's truly important and things that are just not worth bothering with. And this is the part of what I would consider the warrior mindset of just putting in proportion what is worth getting anxious about, or what is worth getting your how would you call it, your assertive mind, like your problem solving, we solve this crisis approach going. And for most of daily life, I find that this is oftentimes with veterans, especially combat veterans, they seem, people around them, their family and whatnot, will say they're disengaged. They don't really, they're not emotionally invested in their friends, their family, what's going on around them. And I think that might be the case, that they have just been in situations where they're fighting for their lives and having to deal with severe danger. And the idea of, are we going to go for coffee with your cousin or something like that is just not important. And they do kind of disengage that way. And I think it's a reality check, not to say that we should all be emotionally disengaging from what's going on around us, but to have the reality check of what's really worth allowing your blood to get heated, or to get upset or to get frustrated, and allowing that frustration to be vented on other people. And I think we are all guilty of it. I know I get agitated when I'm dealing with provocations or people that are upset, or, even I get frustrated and upset, and sometimes, express it when I come afterwards, and just like you said, I shouldn't have done that. I should have, kept my perspective and realized that it wasn't worth getting in an argument or getting heated or even getting frustrated about. And I think we're in a time now where there's so many people are frustrated. There's so much going on, and I'll date this. We're talking in March of 2021, where we've been under lockdown for about a year now. People are feeling the effects of being isolated from one another, from personal contact. They've been frustrated with not being allowed some to go back to work. They're stuck in their homes. I think these are all recipes for frustration, and they feel isolated. And when you get farther away from human contact, you sometimes lose that skill of basic courtesy and basic etiquette, things that are important social factors for humans to have with one another. And I think people would argue that the internet is no help.
No.
And I myself have been tested many times with trying to have online discussions and getting exposed to the toxicity and the animosity and the anger and the frustration that people will often just blurt out and vomit, their anger and things on you, when they don't even know who you are, or they may misunderstand your message, or they take it in a way that wasn't intended. There's a lot of that, and to me, the warrior realizes what is important to engage with and what is not. And I guess that's to sum up that point is to keep perspective of what's really crucial to you. What is a real threat to you? A lot of people will say a harsh word is a threat, but you talk to somebody who's dealt with physical violence, and they know that talk is just talk. It's when it turns into action that things get important now. So perspective, I think, is an important factor to hear with the mindset of a warrior. Would you say that that's true?
I would say everything you said is true. And I got to tell you, I'm a very pugnacious person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a volatile person. It's that dysfunctional Scot-Irish gene set.
Mm-hmm.
The Scots, if they weren't fighting an external invader, would fight each other. They don't call them the fighting Irish for nothing. It's something that I've had to try to control in myself all my life. And I'm very good in some contexts. I've rarely raised my voice with a subordinate, past the rank of corporal, I think. But I yelled at my daughter the other day, and it came out, and I felt so bad about it because she didn't deserve to have me yell at her that way. And it's similar to that event at that gas station that we just talked about. And it's a constant battle in myself, and to approach things maybe more stoically, Marcus Aurelius, and I've been reading some of that, to approach things much more calmly, to understand what is an actual, what is a risk to elevate or a threat to elevate, and what is just ego getting in the way. And I'm as guilty as anybody on planet Earth for having a hard time doing that. But I think if we are martial arts students or martial artists, warriors, soldiers, in the global term of soldier, we have to constantly train, just as we constantly train in the physical skills of the martial arts. We have to constantly train our mind and our emotions to be calm in society, not let our egos take control. I think I mentioned it earlier when we were talking. A lot of dojo doors and windows will say, leave your ego outside. And that's so hard to do. It's easy for me to do in the dojo. It's much harder for me to do outside of the dojo. So, I mean, I have to continually train myself. And I think that's a lesson for all martial arts students and martial artists, is that there is another side besides just the physical practice. I mean, I'm a big believer in physical fitness. That is a foundation, regardless of the martial arts a person practices. And then there are the skills that are inherent with that particular martial arts system or set of martial arts somebody practices. But to be a well-rounded martial artist does not just include, physicality, physical fitness, physical skills, understanding the martial arts system thoroughly that a person is training in, but also to have the calmness of being that one can, without ego, without anger, without fright, can assess situations and analyze them adequately before deciding how to act. Because just like you mentioned, discussions on the internet, and I haven't looked in the comments section of your YouTube channel, but there's somebody's going to make a comment about this video, and it probably is somebody who didn't actually watch it or didn't watch it all the way through, and it's going to come out of left field. It's going to be very nasty. It's going to be very mean, because that's what people do on the internet. And so, I don't behave that way on the internet, and at least I try hard not to, and I don't pop off at people. And so, in dealing with actual humans in real life, I try not to pop off at people either. And when I do, I take the remedial training. I break the verbal judo book out and I start reading it. I break Marcus Aurelius out and start reading it, because like I said, I don't think I'll ever reach martial artist level, and I'll always be a martial arts student. But to be a complete martial artist, a complete warrior, one has to train their emotional mind as well. And I think that's another fundamental practice, much like, keeping oneself in good physical condition. To be able to do the martial art is to keep oneself in good emotional condition as well.
It is, and it's a journey without a destination. There's at no point can you say, I'm done, I've got it, and I like how you stated about going back and reminding yourself, because we're all human. Many skills are perishable, and social skills, we've seen this last year, if not, we've been an experiment on how perishable the social skills are. We know when we raise children, or even, dogs need to be around other dogs to socially fit in and learn the skills to behave well with one another elegantly. And humans are very much the same way. And removing a human from that social contact for a period of time can make some rough spots. So it's something we all need to refresh ourselves on constantly. And there's one concept within there that I think that within this whole discussion you can look at, and this is something that I like to do, is boil things down to principles. And within that warrior mindset really is, what is the core, we call it first principles in philosophy, because this will be something as one goes into introspection, into analyzing, well, why do I train martial arts, or what am I trying to get out of it? What am I going to be as I put these tools together? What's the core principle of what they are when they're assembled and what they should be? And the core principle I admire the most is the idea that do no harm, but accept no harm. And that is basically be a good person. That's the do no harm part, which is initiating aggression or initiating force or violence or things like that. You don't do that. But one could just use the do no harm and kind of come away saying, I'm just going to disengage from everybody. I'm not going to involve myself. I'm just going to separate. Because you could accomplish that. If you were alone for the rest of your life, you would do no harm to another human being. So you could satisfy that.
Right.
the other part is, and this is where I think the martial artist aspect and the warrior side comes in, is accept no harm. Do not allow harm to be done to you, and therefore do not allow harm to come to innocent people that you are responsible for. And that may be, your family, because you're responsible for them for a long period of time, or even, people that are stuck in an elevator with you. A warrior has responsibility for what goes on around him or her. And so that core principle of do no harm and accept no harm, which is kind of a polite way of putting it. I've heard, on the internet, they say do no harm and take no shit. Although that version, although more colorful, can kind of introduce the idea that if somebody starts to provoke you, you have license to unleash your physical force on them. And I don't agree with that. A real warrior, somebody who's truly capable and dangerous, knows that getting into confrontations over pride is a waste of time, and there's nothing good that happens from them. It's just not important. And there's a difference between engaging in violence for either fun or for the fact that you need your ego stroked or to make yourself look good to others, a social display. All that stuff is nonsense and garbage to that warrior who knows when it's really time that force needs to be used. And that's judgment to me. It comes down to having an even-keeled mind, and I like the Marcus Aurelius, the Stoicism, that you could call it even strategy of knowing what's worth it, you getting into it, and what just doesn't need to be addressed or walk away from. And so, but without ever getting down to those core principles of what you're about or why you do what you do, or not you specifically, but why we as martial artists train. Right. We're using our training to understand and deal with violence effectively and efficiently without playing with it. We're not indulging in it for entertainment purposes or to enforce our will on other people. We're using it to protect ourselves and to protect civility and courtesy, things like that. I think that's an important perspective for anybody who studies violence or trains it, to know when it's supposed to be used and when it's not supposed to be used.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed about particularly Aikido, within the Aikido community, is a lot of times practitioners seem to feel like they are somehow superior in philosophy or morality than other martial artists or other martial sports. My experience with crossing paths with many, many martial artists and sport fighters, competitors of all stripes, almost all of them have a very similar approach to violence. They don't mind, if it's within a sport, they love doing their wrestling, they love doing their boxing, but they really don't want a real fight. They might be very dangerous and capable of doing tremendous damage to somebody, but it's nothing they look forward to doing. They don't want to engage in it. They'd rather avoid it. But the great thing about those people that I've run into is almost every one of them says, I know that if need be, and if I needed to protect somebody, I have the ability to do it. And I believe I have the judgment to step in and the courage to step in and save somebody who might not be saved if it wasn't for that help.
Yeah, that's true. And I also think it goes to, there's a huge debate in the martial arts community about the difference between the sport martial arts and the traditional martial arts. If you just want to, put them into those two categories. And there's always someone who says something like, well, I've heard this before. Boxing's not a martial art, it's a sport. Well, I'm here to tell you, martial, fighting, arts, artisan skill, it's a martial art. My opinion, it's a martial art, but it's also a martial art that outside of the rule set can be very effective. Mm-hmm. But people who practice competitive martial arts know one thing. They know that anybody can be gotten by anybody else. So it's same Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. How do you get good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? You just keep doing it for a long time, and along the way, you're going to get submitted right, left, upside down, sideways, and the same things in boxing. Somebody may be less skilled than you, and I did do about that much boxing when I was like 19 years old in the Marine Corps. Somebody who may not be as skilled as you may not have seen that jab or cross or hook or uppercut coming, and you get tagged really good. I don't think any kind of grappling art is the same as what I just mentioned about BJJ. And I think in sports martial arts, you both learn the skills necessary to apply them outside of the rule set, but also know that somebody can get you, even if it's just based on pure luck that you can be gotten. And I think that really, it relieves a lot of people of the egoism of relieves them of the egoism and allows them to approach things in a much more calm fashion. And as you mentioned, they really don't want to get in a fight. No, they don't have anything to prove, generally speaking. That's one way to look at it. But everybody who practices a martial art where you're actually sparring against somebody knows that even just based on pure luck, somebody can get you. And it's better not to engage in the physical altercation unless it's necessary. And I mean, if things are necessary, they're necessary, and then one can bring their skills to bear. And I think it's not just that realization. That I'll go back and say egoism. It kind of relieves somebody of egoism and allows them to approach things much more calmly. And I'm willing to be wrong on that, but that's my personal perspective. And when it comes to philosophy and about a martial artist who practices a particular martial art, believing that somehow they're philosophically superior, I would have to ask that person, if I were to meet him or her, what philosophical superiority even is, or what moral superiority do they believe that they possess. And I don't know how far you want to go down discussion of Aikido, but when we were talking about it last week on the Dirt Wasp podcast I think Aikido attracts a certain kind of person. And some of these people don't really truly want the martial side of Aikido. They're looking for more of the philosophical / physical practice. And they fool themselves with the belief that their perceived self-superiority of philosophy or morality, the martial art that, you can use it to defend yourself and not hurt your attacker, which, yeah, certainly some of the techniques can be used, and that is the applicable result. But I think it is that mindset going into the study of it, and this could apply to other martial arts, not just Aikido. This could apply to other martial arts students, and other martial artists. But I think that we as human beings are really hard pressed to self-declare our moral and or philosophical superiority over another human being. It's easy to do. I mean, we make judgments about other people all the time. But when one has a belief that one is somehow superior to their fellow human, based upon the philosophy of a martial art they practice, I think that is a little bit delusional and self-congratulatory. And I don't.
It also comes out of the ego. I mean, we look back through human behavior for centuries. How many people of one religion decried, heretics of those who study another, worship another god, they practice another religion. And this is where I guess I'm a little uncomfortable, admittedly, with any martial art becoming a pseudo religion or a pseudo kind of a cult, really, where there is that level of judgment upon other human beings. And yeah, of course, you can assess people by their actions, whether it's alone, an individual person, or a collective group of people. But I think you're right. It's a danger to indulge yourself in comparing yourself morally or spiritually, emotionally, to others. It's just a poor path, and I think it's one that a warrior would avoid, because you're indulging yourself in kind of your own self-aggrandizement, and raising yourself up by tearing down other people is just a bad practice all around.
Yes, it is. And some people don't realize that that's what they're doing, because they're so wrapped up in their own moral or philosophical or even intellectual superiority. And again, that's, there's, and talking about intellectual superiority. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm just about as average as you can get, except in physical size, in which I'm a little bit below average. But I was a big fan of the television show, The Big Bang Theory.
Okay.
And the main character, Sheldon Cooper, was a really smart guy, astrophysicist, 2 PhDs, blah, blah, blah. And this was never in the series as far as I know, but he was the kind of guy who thought he was so smart, and he was very smart, but thought he was so smart he could figure anything out. But I always thought to myself, if somebody put an old, Volkswagen Beetle in front of him and say, take it apart, fix it, and put it back together again, he wouldn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't know what to do, because his intelligence wasn't geared towards that kind of thing. Again, I don't want to create another rabbit hole for Todd to go down talking about intellectual superiority, but I think it's worth mentioning, because I think that some people who believe they're superior, it could be based on the belief that have a superior intellect, a superior morality, or a superior philosophy, and maybe that can be bred via a particular martial art. I mean, if you look at Buddhism, that's a philosophy, and the great Buddha himself was quoted as saying, "Don't worship me. This isn't a religion." I mean, he was a philosopher, but what did humankind do? Well, they turned it into a religion, and that's fine. I'm not knocking. I'm just using that as an example of a philosophical approach and study, which is turned into a religion. And again, I guess some martial arts are turned into that in some places by some people. But I think that when that's done, it really loses sight of what martial arts are. And talking in this podcast about the difference between a soldier, a fighter, and a warrior, and that sort of thing, and how those words can mean different things in different contexts, and different things to different people in different contexts. It's extremely broad. Same thing's true of martial arts, but I've always approached it as, martial comes from the Roman god of war, Mars, meaning war or military or fighting. And arts, while there is tremendous physical art in the practice of martial arts, and people do design new techniques all the time, especially in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and one could say that is a physical expression, a physically artistic expression. I believe that arts is really closer to artisan or craftsman. Because an artisan is a skilled craftsman. An artist may be a fine painter, but an artisan makes something and is a skilled craftsman. So to me, martial arts means fighting skill. So if you're a martial artist, you are someone who engages in the study of fighting skills. If you're a student, you're studying fighting skills. And I think if one can reduce the very definition of martial arts down to that, and there are going to be people listening to this and watching this totally disagree with that, and that's fine. Again, it means different things to different people, but that's what it means to me. And if you think of it in terms of the study of a fighting skill or a set of fighting skills, then it really removes from the equation the higher order of the higher order of preference, or placing it above us as some kind of spiritual pseudo-religious practice because it's fighting skill. It's not religion. And although there's philosophical elements, it's not really philosophy. I mean, you want fighting philosophy. There's plenty out there. There's Sun Tzu is one of the biggest examples. There is, although it's hard to read, there's Clausewitz in the 19th century. You can, and I'm leaving some out. There's another Chinese military philosopher whose name escapes me, who came along about 2,000 years after Sun Tzu. So I mean, it's out there already, and nobody worships Sun Tzu in his philosophy. Nobody worships that. Nobody worships him, but people reference it all the time. How many business books are based on the writings of Sun Tzu? Business books, my goodness. And my approach to martial arts is that it's fighting skills. And and I mentioned to you one time we were talking on the phone is that to me, everything, I look at things through how do I operationalize it? And I don't operationalize religion. You can incorporate that in one's, personal, sense of self, one's personal well-being. But my goodness, a martial art as a religious practice, and I know it's out there because you can read about it, but I think that's a little bit much for for the world of martial arts to have a martial arts that is a pseudo religion, and certainly the philosophy can be there, but I don't think the religion ought to be. Just my personal opinion. I don't know if I went too far past what you just said or not.
No, not at all. In fact, we've been talking for quite a while, and I think we can bring it to a good wrap-up point. And because we could go on about, I think that when you have the power, the physical prowess to cause harm to people, you naturally will touch on what are your values? When do you use it? That's the philosophy part. And I totally agree with you on the religion aspect, because when you talk about it, philosophy and religion and spirituality are very interwoven. So it's kind of like trying to unpack a ball of twine. You're going to keep pulling strings out that are all connected to one another. So it makes sense that this would happen with martial arts, because it is such a personal thing, and the responsibility of having the ability to harm another human being comes with a great burden, and you will question yourself of when should you use it, how should you use it, under what conditions, what is the morality of a situation that would require you to use force or to use that power. So I can see why it would be, but I agree with you. I think it's taken to an absurd degree sometimes, with how groups tend to focus on certain aspects of the whole realm of that warrior part, and that's where I guess I would end this with what I define as that definition of warrior. It encompasses your own moral values, your philosophy, your rules of engagement, your physical training, and how that affects your physical training, how it affects your development as a person, how it can, when you realize you have the ability to harm someone, you do calm down, you become less agitated and less problematic. This is less emotionally volatile. And I think this is why, like you mentioned earlier, veterans and people with post-traumatic stress disorder, things like that, they find within training martial arts a calm, and they are able to get back some of their sanity that they lost by being exposed to trauma and trauma through violence, or just trauma in general. And that's a deep subject, and I think we'll get to this wrap up point. And I'll give you the last word, since you've been so great with what we've talked about on this podcast, and we'll kind of wrap things up.
Yeah. Well, Tristan, it's been great being on your podcast. Thank you again for being on mine. It's a great discussion. I think all of these things we've talked about, like you said, is like unwrapping a ball of twine. It just seems to go on and on forever. And some of these things that we're talking about, gosh, we could fill volumes of our podcast just with pieces of this discussion and try to expand on them. And I will say that I think people watching and listening to this are going to be students of the martial arts and are going to be, martial artists, and each comes to those things with their own, uh, personal philosophy, personal morality, their own approach to their study. And I would just say that, everything you and I have discussed, Tristan, is based upon our own set of experiences and our own opinions, and reasonable minds can differ. But having said that, I think martial arts practice is for everyone. And there's so many different martial arts out there to practice. I mean, historical European martial arts. I mean, that's really cool stuff. I've never done it, but I find it really cool. Combat pistol and rifle craft. There are plenty of competitions out there. That is a martial art, in my opinion. There is Aikido and Judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, various forms of wrestling and boxing and kickboxing, and the different karate disciplines, the different kickboxing disciplines. That there's so many places one can go just in the world of martial arts. And I think it's for everybody, and anyone who's watching or listening to this who hasn't or doesn't train and is interested, go visit some martial arts schools, find one that's right for you, one that you like, and then pursue the practice. And I will say, it just came to mind because, we get this a lot. When I say we, gosh, I don't currently study Aikido, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but for some reason, Aikido speaks to me in a way I can't even articulate. Is, we get into these questions about, quote, what's the best martial art, close quote. And the best martial art is the one that you enjoy enough to keep doing and which you get good at. And it may also be whichever dojo or martial arts gym is closest to you and most convenient to get to. That's a factor in our daily busy lives. So don't discount those things either. But martial arts are really for everybody. And I would encourage everybody who has an interest to go check it out. And, nothing says you got to, some people are lifelong practitioners like you are, Tristan. I'm a dabbler. I've been dabbling my entire life since I was 19 years old. And I will continue to dabble in different martial arts. I did Cali the other day, for example. And, you don't have to go study one martial art forever. Go study one for 1 year and another for another year. Why not? It's to benefit you, not to benefit anyone else. So martial arts are for everybody. And I encourage everybody to pursue the martial arts practice of their choice in the way that they deem best for them.
That is a great message, and you can get things out of it without having to be a lifer. Even a year or two's worth of training will benefit you, especially if you enjoy it. And finding a group that's enjoyable to train with that's finding a jewel. It really is. And so,
indeed, sir.
Absolutely. So I want to give a little plug to Todd's podcast, the Dirt Wasp podcast, and I'll put a link in the description.
Thank you.
Just as a quick reminder, go check it out. He's got a number of episodes on there, some fascinating stuff. I've not listened to all of them yet, but I'm definitely gonna go check out some of those. If you want to support this podcast, I would recommend that you go to the Spirit Aikido online program. I've got probably 160 coming up on 160 videos in the program right now. I just wrapped up a series on training for Randori, which is the beginnings of training for dealing with multiple people. I've found some great success in even people that have been in my dojo for a week, like they've just started brand new, and how to teach the fundamentals and how to get started. And that's a good bedrock of training people to get used to the dealing with multiple people, not becoming afraid of it. And I've got some great material there. And I'm just getting into filming some stuff on using Pygmachia or ancient Greek boxing for entries, how to cover distance, protecting your head to get close where we get into Aikido range. So those will be coming out very soon. So I got some exciting stuff coming.
Those sound great, Tristan.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. This is part of what I love about martial arts is it's not being so hyper focused in just one area, but taking in influences from many different arts, because I have yet to find a martial art that doesn't have some great stuff in it, like fantastic for simple, direct, easy to apply, very functional, low risk, high reward. I just love that stuff. I love training with all kinds of different people. So it may seem initially that these things don't fit in with what we would normally associate with Aikido or one art and another art, but the closer you look at it, the more you see that they have universal principles that apply to all of them. And that's what fascinates me. So thank you very much for being on this podcast. And I guess have a great day, Todd.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, and right back at you, Tristan.
All right.
I sure appreciate it.
We'll be talking with you real soon. Take care.
Roger that. You too. Thanks.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.